Ballistic pits, okay. Uh, Good morning. It is Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. This is the second half of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy's morning session. We're turning our attention back to S5 and that relating to portable meeting the mandated greenhouse gas reductions for the thermal sector through electrification, decarbonization, efficiency, and weatherization measures, also known as the Affordable Heat Act. The Senate Appropriations Committee received the bill, has proposed an amendment, and we're going to review that amendment and then take a committee vote so that when it comes up today, we can report the committee's position on that amendment. And with that, Ms. Chakowski, thank you for coming back in. If you could walk us through the Senate Appropriations Proposal Amendment, that would be helpful.
Sure. Good morning, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I just passed out paper copies to the members. The draft, it's draft 1.1 of the Committee on Appropriations Amendment. It's 4 pages. It's dated February 28th, 2023. There are 12 instances of amendment. So it's been a while since you've looked at an amendment. Your amendment to S5 is a strike-all amendment, meaning it rewrites the entire bill. Senate Appropriations did instances of amendment, which are point edits to your amendment. So the first, I'll do a high overview. The first two relates to what is colloquially known as the check back provision. The third one adds some intent language that they were interested in. And then 4th through 8th are the equity language that this committee worked on. And then the last couple of sections relate to the appropriations in this bill. So the first instance of amendment adds a new section to the Chapter 89, which is the statutory provisions in this bill. And it adds new language regarding rulemaking authority. So it's notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, the Commission shall not file proposed rules to the Secretary of State or issue any orders implementing the clean heat standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. If this language sounds familiar, it's because it was language that was in H.M. 15 from last year. So this language was part of last year's bill, as was the language in the second instance of amendment. So let me tell you what this does practically. It prevents the PUC from issuing rules or orders without the General Assembly enacting authorization to do that. Enactment here means a bill. It needs to pass both bodies and be sent to the governor, where then either it will be signed or it could be overridden. So it requires additional action from the General Assembly. This is slightly different than what your bill did as it came out of this committee, which was just hold the rules in limbo until the General Assembly had reviewed them. But this is prohibiting the PUC from moving forward without legislatively enacted authorization to do so.
Sir,
I got the impression, I haven't read it all, that what was being sought one of the things being sought by appropriations was that the PUC would go through the process as if they were preparing rules so that they could present them to us. So is the shall not file rules means permits them to go through the process as if they were going to promulgate them and do everything, but then not actually file it. That's what it means.
Yes, the same steps will still happen as your bill contemplates, where the rules will be submitted to the General Assembly. They just are unable to file them without authorization. So they can still go through the beginning.
They've written their term paper, they're just not handing it in.
Yes.
so they do follow what we asked before. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with this part of it. We're still delivering a rule to us,
Yes.
the General Assembly, that's on January 15th, 2025.
Yes, and I'll talk more about that in the second instance of
All
amendment.
the hearings and timelines
Yes.
and everything will be obeyed.
Yes.
So they go to the legislature instead of LCAR. Do they then go to LCAR or no?
Yes.
after the legislature
Yes,
approves, then they go to Elcar.
yes.
But the legislature, Elcar is there as in behalf of the legislature. We've already said, okay, why do they go to Elcar?
The
Yes.
ministerial duty.
I do think that's a fair point.
Belt and suspenders.
That's not quite the metaphor. I'll work on it.
With a rhetorical flourish, I hope. Okay,
So I will say the second instance of amendment, there are a lot of statutory citations in, and it relates to what Senator McCormick was just discussing, which is that the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, sets out a number of steps that rules need to go through in order to be enacted. And it waives a lot of those steps because the General Assembly will be doing review. So it does waive a lot of the initial steps of the review process, including going to ICAR and the required one public hearing that the APA requires, because you've set out a lot more than that. So there's some acknowledgement that the S5 does have a process built into it, so it's waiving part of the APA. So the second instance of amendment, which is on page 1, is also identical from last year's bill. And so it reads, final rules on or before January 15, 2025, the commission shall submit to the General Assembly final proposed rules to implement the clean heat standard. The commission shall not file the final proposed rules with the Secretary of State until specific authorization is enacted by the General Assembly to do so. Notwithstanding 3 VSA sections 820, 831, 836 through 840, and 841A, upon affirmative authorization enacted by the General Assembly authorizing the adoption of rules implementing the clean heat standard, the commission shall file as the final proposed rule the rules implementing the clean heat standard approved by the General Assembly with the Secretary of State and Elcar pursuant to 841. The filing shall include everything that is required under section 838, A1 through 5, 8 through 13, 15, and 16, and 841B. The review, adoption, and effect of the rules implementing the clean heat standard shall be governed by 3 VSA 841C, 842 exclusive of B4, 843, 845, 846 exclusive of A3. Once adopted and effective, any amendments to the rules implementing clean heat standard shall be made in accordance with the rest of the APA. So
can you tell us what we just excluded, please?
yes, I can. Can you?
Well, I'm gonna be
I'm sorry,
listening
I'm being a
closely.
little, I'm working on it. I have it all written out. It's just, all over the place today. All right. So all of those sections, the 800s, are from the Administrative Procedures Act. So 841 is one of the main procedures of the Administrative Procedure Act. It dictates that when the PUC shall file the final proposed rules with Secretary of State and Elcar, and with that comes the statements about the rule, why it is not arbitrary, why it fits in the agency's authority, strategizing for maximum public input that they use, the sufficiency of the economic and environmental impacts they're required to do. It also addresses, it requires the PUC to have addressed the substantial arguments against the rules that may have come up in the comment period. It then directs Elcar to distribute the final rules to the chair and any legislative member that requests them. And it allows the legislative chairs to convene discussion on the rules. So that's pretty standard. So that is required in this. What is not required, so the language that's being waived, 820 is the process to go through ICAR, the Interagency Committee on Administrative Rules. 831, which establishes the reasons an agency may initiate rulemaking. That's unnecessary because you're telling them to do it. 836 lays out the steps that an agency follows as part of the rule adoption process. Those are being waived because this is a different process. 837 is how emergency rules are filed. 838 establishes the proposed rules being filed filed with the Secretary of State. So we're waiving that step. 839 directs the Secretary of State to publish proposed rules online and in the newspaper. 840 requires the agency to hold at least one public hearing on the rules. That's being waived because you're requiring more. And then 841 is the direction to file the final proposed rules with the Secretary and LCAR. And so that's further addressed later. And then the filing shall include everything that is required in 838A 1 through 5. So 1 is the name of the agency, 2 is the economic impact statement, 3 is the environmental impact analysis, 4 is an explanation of all materials incorporated by reference, 5 is the text of the rule, 8 is a brief summary of the scientific information upon which the rule is based, 9 is a concise summary of the rule and its effect, 10 is the specific statutory authority for the rule, 11 is the explanation of why the rule is necessary. 12 is the explanation of the people who will be affected by the rule. 13 is the person who at the agency is available for questions. 15, whether there is an exemption to the Public Records Act in the rule. 16 is the signed and dated statement of the agency approving the contents of the rule. And then 841B again is an explanation that the agency has to provide to LCAR about stating the rules within the agency's authority, whether or not it's arbitrary, how they maximize public input, and then again, the economic impact analysis and environmental impact analysis. So there was interest in excluding some of the steps of the APA that are covered by this unusual process, but still requiring the PUC to file a substantial part of the information that would normally be required from a rule.
Thank you for that thoughtful walkthrough in that part.
So, Mr. Chair, for those people that are listening, many times the legislature decides that something ought to be done, but we're not expert on the technical aspects of what ought to be done, and we assign others, chemists or mathematicians or road builders, people expert in road building, to come back and craft the rules. And then those rules get reviewed by a committee that the chair and I serve. But they've essentially been crafted by unelected people who are expert in the area. So here, rather than have an unelected group of experts design a plan that we direct them to design and having a handful of legislators approve it, this will come back to the entire legislature to approve. And that's happened a couple times. Once was the 10-acre loophole for septic systems, and it was controversial, so it came back to the legislature to approve. And another time we tried it was net metering, computation, how it would be paid for or not paid for. And we erred. We allowed them, if the legislature didn't act in a certain period of time, we allowed the PUC to implement their proposed rules by order. And it took place. The legislature never had a chance to review it. And it was done. My understanding is that that mistake is not being made again here. Is that correct?
No, yes.
It would come back to the entire legislature that would be elected at the next election.
Yes.
It would be the subject of phone calls and emails for the next couple of years. And citizens would be able to weigh in at a public hearing when the PUC works on the rules, which may or may not later become law. Many would say that this is a check back, although that's not defined in statute. Is that a fair characterization of what's being proposed here.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I were to say something, if someone asked me about the advisability of doing this, I'd say we have, we're providing for absolute assurance that the full General Assembly review the plan before anything could be implemented by virtue of a vote, both bodies, with the action being referred to the governor. So there's sort of a security of knowing that that plan is deeply vetted after being fully developed. For people who are concerned that this is slowing things down too much, just remind us all that S5 built a pause in for one full legislative session to review the rule, although it didn't mandate that vote that we're talking about. So if the legislature responds to the rule plan presented in a timely way, it's also seems highly likely to me that we will in fact lose no time. The rule, if moved, would be filed by June 1st, just as the original S5 condition. So if I wanted to be editorializing, I'd say we get the best of both worlds out of that. Okay. Senator McDonald and then Senator McCormick.
One of the issues that's been bandied about, to my surprise, TV for people that know better, has suggested that S5 has a tax in it, and only the legislature can enact taxes. Legislature can't say to the PUC, go ahead, establish a tax. The legislature has to establish and approve a tax. So is that a fair characterization of the
Yes.
statute? So there is, regardless of how someone might characterize what the PUC proposes, there is no tax in this bill, and this PUC is not a taxing authority on heating fuels, and the legislature hasn't made it, and this bill doesn't make it a taxing authority on heating fuels. Is that a fair characterization?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Senator McCormick.
I don't see this amendment as a response to S5 as it actually is, so much as a response to S5 as it has been portrayed. I think it's unfortunate, but I also understand how things get done, not only in the legislature, but in the world in general, where the question is not always, do I like it, but can I live with it? And I can live with this.
So with that, thank you both. Let's go on to I think we're up to sub 4 on 114. I think that's the start. Josh?
So I will just say that the list that I read you were all the citations in number 2. I can also read you the ones that are in number 3 if you'd like, which are the things that need to be addressed.
You read through them. Anyone who hear them enumerated? Through 10. Okay, so let's for being completely thorough then. Sorry, I just remembered. Let's start right then at line 11.
Great, so I did read this already, but the review and adoption of the rules will be governed, but there are additional provisions in here. So they shall be governed by 841C, which is LCAR's duty to provide the relevant committee chairs with the rule and to anyone member who asks for it. 842 lays out the reason, LCAR's review process and the grounds on which LCAR can object to the rule. It says exclusive of B4 because B4 is the ground that the agency has not adhered to the public engagement strategy prescribed by ICAR. That one's left out because the bill is not going, the rules are not going to ICAR. You have provided the public engagement strategy in this bill. 843 is the process for filing the adopted rules. And so that's the 45 days after the rules have been filed with LCAR, sorry. And then 845 states that adopted rules are binding and valid and take effect 15 days after they have been adopted. And then 846 is addresses procedural failures in rulemaking and what happens with that. So the process will be bound by those as well. Oh, and then 8A3 is excluded because that's allowing, it says the rule can fail if they haven't followed ICAR's engagement strategy. And then after the rules have been adopted, they need to comply with the APA moving forward. So the third instance of amendment is at the bottom of page 2. So this is on a different topic entirely. So this is adding new language to the intent section of the bill. A new sentence to read, the clean heat standard shall, to the greatest extent possible, maximize the use of available federal funds to deliver clean heat measures.
It was always our intent, now it's expected.
On page 3, the instances of amendment 4 through 8 are the equity language that you all recommended.
Anyone wants to do that again?
And then on page 4, 9, 10, 11, 12 relate to the appropriation section of the bill. So section 7, the appropriation section, the PUC's appropriation is being raised from $800,000 to $825,000. The Senate Appropriations Committee was interested in addressing the equity concerns that the Director of Racial Equity raised, including the translation services. The 10th instance of amendment grants a second program analyst to the Department of Public Service. As it came out of here, the bill had one staff attorney for the Department of Public Service and one analyst. This is giving us a second analyst. Number 11 raises the department's budget from $400,000 to $900,000. This is related to number 12 because it inserts the language, the money can be used for conducting the potential study. So this came up in the Senate Appropriations Committee. There's language in your bill related to the appointment of the default delivery agent, which will include a potential study, which is a term of art that the Department of Public Service uses. It's currently a type of review that they do in regards to Efficiency Vermont. And so they have asked for additional funding to do that study that will address different elements of the default delivery agent's budget and how that will be calculated. So they're given an additional $500,000 to address the additional staff person they have requested, this potential study, and they also thought they needed additional funds for the amount of work they will do on this program.
In the bill itself, in that subsection E, it's a brief section, so I'll read exactly what that study entails. An initial potential study conducted by the Department of Public Service to include a quantification of available thermal resources, thermal market conditions, and statewide and regional thermal workforce characteristics. Yep. I think that there was similar work done when Efficiency Vermont was established, something along those lines. I wasn't there for all the testimony. Okay. Anything? So that's it. 12 instances of amendment. Any questions for council? Seeing none. The chair would welcome a motion to adopt the, I don't know if we formally adopt. I'm looking for a vote to approve. Thank you.
Find it favorable.
Right, endorse.
Endorse, find
Say
favorable.
nice things about it.
Say nice things about it. So the motion is whether or not the committee gets to find it
Or to
favorable.
know when amended is recommended by the Committee on Appropriations.
Well, I think we have to support it. Yes, you can say it that way, or we're supporting your vote, but yes. So that is the motion to approve the appropriations amendment. If there's no further discussion, I would ask the clerk.
Oh, did I hear Senator McDonald make that motion?
I think we heard Senator McDonald.
I heard as well.
I believe that was the motion that Senator McCormick made.
No, I just kind of clarified how it would be worded if someone.
I put your name down, Mark.
If someone else were to say such a thing, okay?
Oh,
So,
I have to call the roll on this question.
Alright.
If that's accurate.
Yeah, I would ask for call the roll.
If there's no further discussion,
There is further discussion.
please, Senator McDonald.
So I asked the council, so in the meantime, while this takes place, oil prices will continue to be set by the oil companies that sell and deliver oil to the citizens.
Yes.
And they will be free to do what they do now, which is to raise them and lower them whenever they feel it's appropriate for them to do so.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, when we discussed intervening and trying to put an end to the roller coaster of oil prices that went up and down, that people of various incomes had to deal with, I remarked that it was going to be it for a year or so of people having to put on sweaters and use extra blankets unless things changed. So I would say today that during this interim period where we pass this bill that's before us, that same condition is going to exist. We're going to have no control over people's heating bills. We won't have the resources available to help them winterize and do what they need to do for a year and a half anyway, the earliest. I read a letter recently in the paper by a delivery person who didn't mention sweaters and blankets and said that citizens would probably be wise to hunker down and pray for an early spring this year and next year. Because the oil companies will be free to charge whatever they wish to charge. And the citizens are going to have to deal with that from home to home to home with some modest existing help from things like light heat and others. But it's pretty much the free market's going to reign here for the next year and a half until the PUC does its work. And ways to bring costs down for families is going to take a couple of years if it's done as quickly as possible under this statute. So that's where we are, and this is a slow process to make any changes in the status quo. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator McDonald, the only note I would make sure if someone's listening in recent years where the weatherization and scale work we've done in here and with our colleagues, there's roughly $100 million that's been put into weatherization programs in an effort to pick up the pace. We still have Efficiency Vermont operating out there providing assistance. We still have Tier 3 in the RES, so that's utilities providing assistance. Address a variety of things, but reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which may or may not come out of the way they keep that particular home or business. So I want to make sure people know that we have more than one iron in the fire, but this one is going to take a while to warm up. All right, so with that, is there any further discussion? Madam Clerk?
I will call the roll. Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator McCormick.
Yes.
Senator Watson. Yes. Senator White. Yes. Senator Bright.
Yes.
The vote total is 5-0-0.
After Senator, I think Kitchell presents the, then I'll report the committee vote.
And
Yes.
thank you, Chairman Britt. since our fantastic committee assistant Jude is on the screen and not in person,
Yeah.
do I deliver this vote tally anywhere or need to do anything with it?
It stays in our committee record.
Susan, that's what I heard. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone, for that. Since we are the nimble Natural Resources and Energy Committee, we're gonna now turn back to S100 because we were doing a walkthrough with council and we didn't quite finish. So here's our chance to spend a little more time with her on S100. So we want to get their copy of the bill. That's what's next.
When last we spoke, I was walking through S100 as introduced. We had just discussed page 16, which establishes zoning by right for housing development projects. The next section of the bill is section 11, which starts at the bottom of page 16 and goes into page 17. It relates to the regional plan. And just as a preview, I have the language that I worked on goes to page 32. So we have 15 more pages to look at. All right, so page.
We'll keep plugging away.
Section 11, elements of a regional plan. The regional plan shall include all of the following. Page 17, a housing element that identifies the regional and community level need for housing that will result in an adequate supply of building code and energy code compliant homes where most households spend not more than 30% of their income on housing and no more than 50% on transportation. To establish housing needs, the Department of Housing and Community Development shall publish statewide and regional housing targets or ranges as part of the statewide housing needs assessment. The regional planning commission shall consult with the statewide housing needs assessment, current and expected demographic data, the current location, types, quality, types, and cost of housing, other local studies related to housing needs, and data gathered pursuant to 4382C of this title. If no data has been gathered, the Regional Planning Commission shall gather it. The Regional Planning Commission's assessment shall estimate the total needed housing investments in terms of price, quality, unit size, type, and zoning district as applicable, and shall disaggregate regional housing targets or ranges by municipality. The housing element shall include a set of recommended actions to satisfy the established needs.
I think Mr. Baker spoke about this.
So the regional plan already requires a housing element. This is requiring some specific things to be part of that housing element. Specifically, targeted amounts of housing that are needed in that region. And then it also requires them to have a recommended actions to satisfy the housing needs.
Any questions on that one? We're not working.
On page 18, section 12 is very similar. This section, however, relates to the municipal plan. So first, a plan for a municipality shall be consistent with the goals of 4302 and compatible with approved plans of other municipalities in the region and with the regional plans, and shall include the following. So this is changing the may to a shall. And then it also amends the housing element. So the plan shall include a housing element that shall include a recommended program for public and private actions to address housing needs as identified by the Regional Planning Commission in the prior section. The program should include specific actions to address the housing needs of persons with low income and persons with moderate incomes, and account for permitted accessory dwelling units as defined in 4312, as well as any material impact on short-term rentals.
Former Mayor Watson, few are on the receiving end of this.
I would say, well, sorry, I think I want to hold my thoughts on that. Now let me chew on that, because we're gonna be coming back
Yes,
to, yeah, I mean,
sure.
is that okay?
Yeah, I don't be.
No, that's fine.
We'll just flag it and we'll keep going. Energy codes.
All right, so section 13 still relates to municipal zoning, but relates to energy code. So 24 VSA 3101 allows a municipality to establish codes and regulation for construction, maintenance, repair, and alteration of buildings within the municipality. And there are such codes and regulations may include different aspects, but this is adding new language on page 19 that says any energy codes and regulations adopted after July 1, 2023 shall not be more restrictive than the residential building energy standards or the stretch code adopted under 30 VSA 51 or the commercial building energy standards adopted under section 53, except where enabled by a municipal charter. Municipalities may enact more stringent local residential building energy standards only for homes that are larger than 1,800 square feet per unit if the municipality receives approval by the Department of Public Service that the municipality followed the procedure in 30 VSA 51C1 and 2. Municipalities may enact more stringent local commercial building energy standards only for homes that are larger than 1,800 square feet per unit. Again, if DPS's approval is under 53C1 and 2. And maybe you have Title 30 that I could grab quickly. So yeah. Oh, I see.
So the first part of that, is you can have a more stringent code in your town, but you have to do it by a charter change. It could not just be a vote of a municipal panel or something like that. Is that the thrust of that? It's possible, but it requires the formality of a charter change.
Yes.
Sharon Watson.
Notwithstanding my previous statement about not finding.
You have to-
Now I would. I'm just gonna say it like this. I think people should be able to have, towns should be able to have more strict energy codes. Oh, municipalities should be able to have more strict energy codes if they so choose.
Local control.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I don't know the thinking behind this, but
I guess, but.
Well, again, I think part of it's uniformity. You know, I've heard that basically builders don't want to end up with codes that vary town by town by town. And that it can be complex for them to figure out what codes that they need to adhere to. And so if we're trying to facilitate housing, if they know the road, if they learn the rules once, knowing that they'll carry over to every town for the most part, other than those who have done a charter change, it just makes their job easier. I think that's the explanation I was given. I'm not arguing it, I'm just saying that's what I've told. Okay, so let's flag that. Yeah, certainly of interest to the committee. Section 14.
Section 14 is an appropriation, so $750,000 is appropriated from the general fund to the municipal and regional planning fund. Municipal and regional planning fund is an existing fund in Title 24 that funds both the regional planning commissions and the municipal work. It funds municipalities at any stage of the development of their planning process. If they don't have anything, like if they don't have a town plan, if they don't yet have bylaws, or if they already do and they want to do updates, they apply for funding under that program.
Section 15, I think we're on.
Page 20, section 15, housing resource navigators. The Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies shall hire housing resource navigators to work with municipalities, regional and local housing organizations, and private developers to identify housing opportunities, match communities with funding resources, and provide project management support. There is appropriated $300,000 to VAPTA for the purpose of hiring the housing navigators. This is a slightly unusual provision. VAPTA is the umbrella agency of the regional planning commissions. And the state statute doesn't normally dictate that these would not be state employees, so it's a little unusual to direct that an organization hire people. But I do think there was testimony that VAPTA is interested in this.
Okay. I know that reminds me a little of what you said, energy planning. Right now, we load money out through the Department of Public Service as well as through the LCT. So there wasn't state employees at the VLCT side. It was have to be $300,000 and it have to be 3 years running and we did that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, section 16 is the Act 250
Oh,
language.
here we go.
I know you've all been so excited to see this because everyone has told you about it except me. All right, so section 16 amends 10 VSA 6001. 6001 is the definition section of Act 250. And unlike other definition sections in statute, 6001 though contains operative language in that it establishes what types of project need a permit. It does this through the definitions of development and subdivision. And as I mentioned in my Act 250 overview, whatever day that was, there are a number of categories of what is development. There's commercial development and governmental project development. And then one of the categories is the construction of housing. So there's a change on page 20. The construction of housing projects. So what triggers Act 250 includes the construction of housing projects such as cooperatives, condominiums, or dwellings, or the construction of mobile homes or mobile home parks with 25 or more units, constructed or maintained on a tract or tracts of land owned or controlled by a person within a radius of 5 miles of any point on any involved land and within a continuous period of 5 years. All right, so there are two things that are happening there. One is very small. The phrase "or maintenance" has been struck. The Economic Development Committee was confused why maintenance of mobile home parks would trigger Act 250. There's a lot of Act 250 case law defining what maintenance means, and it's usually excluded. In a quick search, though, I hadn't found when mobile home maintenance had triggered Act 250. The NRB also was unaware of that specific language ever being used. So striking the word maintenance so that it's construction like the rest of the jurisdictional trigger. So the other thing that's happening is that currently under Act 250, the construction of 10 or more units of housing triggers Act 250, and this is raising it to 25 units. I understand there was some confusion about this. It is 25 units anywhere. It's across the board. So it's 25 units constructed within 5 miles of each other within 5 years.
So 1055 becomes 2555.
Yes.
25.
2555.
25.
Too many fives.
Wow.
Okay.
So then,
Comments now, or?
Sure.
Oh, I think.
Let's, do you want to flag that as a definitely come back to?
Yeah, let me just give a heads up.
Yeah.
I will be, are we taking this up again tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, probably tomorrow, Ellen, if you can get the paperwork done. I want my umbrella permit reworded as an amendment to this bill.
okay, can we just look at your bill?
Sure. Yeah, we can talk, yeah, okay.
Okay, because if I'm drafting amendments, I prefer to like just draft one. So we could look at the text in your bill, because your text wouldn't slide into this section, it would be amending a different
Well,
section.
I would want to delete the sections in this bill
Okay.
that change the definition of a
Yes,
development.
I'm sorry, I'm just being very selfish, because today is the clean heat on the floor,
I know.
and I will be very busy tonight.
Maybe we don't need to take this on
Potentially,
tomorrow, we can do it after town meeting.
But I just, as far as drafting an amendment, I'd be happy to like review the text of it
Yeah,
with you, but.
The short version, the 30,000 foot version is the umbrella permit I've discussed, which would hopefully speed up the process, but not lessen the level of scrutiny.
Alright, so let's keep going. There's a lot of language struck after the word however.
Yeah, so on page 21, another change that's happening within this section related to housing units is striking all of subdivision I. Subdivision I establishes currently in statute caps on the number of priority housing projects that are exempt from Act 250. So what this means, under Act 250 currently, 10 or more units of housing trigger Act 250 review. However, there is another provision that exempts housing, affordable housing, housing that meets the definition of a priority housing project. And the full definition is on the next page and we will get into it. But currently under that, housing that is 20% of the units are affordable for 15 or more years, located within a designated area, can be considered priority housing and are exempt from Act 250 if the number of units is currently below the thresholds. So currently in a municipality with a population of less than 6,000, 49 units can be exempt. In a town with 6,000 to 10,000 people, 74 or more units can be exempt
Environmental review.
from needing an Act 250 permit. So now, any,
What system reviews the capacity and other things like that in lieu of Act 60, which is no longer shall?
so in lieu of Act 250 review, the regular A&R jurisdiction is not changing. And so if stormwater or wastewater permits are needed for a project, that does not change. Additionally, the projects may or may not need municipal review.
So A&R may continue to issue sewage permits for sewage systems that I think they are failing or don't perform as their design suggests they would perform. I don't know.
A&R's jurisdiction over water will not change in any way.
Is A&R now approving septic systems and sewer systems or additional systems where the municipal sewage plants fail to process the sewage and knowingly it goes into streams?
I cannot speak to permits A&R has issued. I can't speak to A&R permits that have been issued. I don't know about them.
So, Mr. Chair, who does say no when it is clear that water coming out is going to be unclear?
I think,
It may be coming out.
I don't remember that, Mr. O'Grady would be able to give us the ins and outs of water quality laws, correct? Is this year really with now because of Act 250, like if we've spoken? I mean, there's a whole thing where municipalities can approve connections to municipal sewer and water. Permits also get reviewed at A&R. You'll see that it's slowing things down. There's a proposal to allow municipalities to make those approvals as long as they adhere to, I think it's like for Vermont water quality standards, almost like a delegation and that's my recollection from prior discussions that might be up to snuff. But I think there's a standard to which both ANR and municipality have to adhere prior to approving a connection.
Nothing about A&R's ability or what their current practices are changing. In this section.
So by striking these, it is, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but there's no size limit to how large a housing development can be, even at the smallest town size. I mean, there'd be some practical, but
So priority housing projects will not have a limit on their size. And all of priority housing projects will be exempt from Act 250.
thanks for zeroing that back down.
So they'll be exempt from Act 250. And someone else will be the decider on this, on these issues. Is that, as a practical matter?
Act 250 review won't happen. Any other statutorily required review is not changing.
And the statutory review that's by default will be the one that's commenced to be practiced in these places is the what?
Projects vary in what types of other permits they may need. They may need a stormwater permit. I don't know the details of that statute. They may need a wastewater permit. We're not changing that jurisdiction at all.
So back to when you flush the toilet, who's in charge of the toilet flush after Act 250's been removed from the approval process?
A&R has jurisdiction over water issues that they specifically are empowered to do.
I guess it comes to flushing the toilet and putting something into a sewer system that frequently doesn't work, it goes into the rivers. What's the remaining governmental authority that may be able to say no?
So I don't know the answer to that question, so why don't we're gonna be meeting this tomorrow. And so let's flag it and come back to it and we'll get an answer. There is a review. Whose review precisely under what rules, no one can say, but we'll get that information.
Writing a note here about, we have speed limits and some people believe, and they be correct, that you drive faster than the speed limit if you keep within 10 miles an hour or whatever. And everybody's in a good mood. And that's the standard. But,
So we'll come back here. Thank you. I think that takes us to top of page 22.
Page 22 is adding a new category under the definition of development. It is slightly related to what we just discussed with housing. So notwithstanding the housing section I just read, the construction of improvements in a designated area for a housing project or a mixed-use development with 25 or more units, constructed or maintained on a tract of tractor land owned or controlled by a person within a continuous period of 3 months shall trigger Act 250 jurisdiction.
As opposed to the old.
And this language removes the 5-year 5-mile rule. So for designated areas, yes, the number of units is going up to 25 units like the prior section, but it's also removing the 5-year 5-mile. And so it's for a housing project constructed within a period of 3 months. So previously, when a person constructed housing units, the number of units that counted towards the 10 units that triggered Act 250 were counted over a period of 5 years. This lowers that to within 3 months.
And, so we've already dealt with priority housing projects. What is the construction of improvements? It just as a phrase, what is the construction of improvements?
Construction of improvements is defined under the Act 250 rules. It's basically any action taken for construction.
Okay, improvement referring to changes on the land or something, like
Yeah.
for improving the land, okay.
Yeah.
So this is saying that you're.
Construction of housing,
You're building houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, or housing.
Yeah.
And
it triggers that construction of improvements because it's anything that goes into site preparation. So Act 250 jurisdiction triggers before you build something,
Yeah.
before you do any site preparation.
so if it's housing or mixed-use development, 25 or more units. Within within a period of 3 months.
Yes.
So we're clear on what we're talking about. The old rule or the new rule is not about what is allowed and not allowed. It's about what is subject to review or not subject to review.
Yes.
Okay, and often the discussion sounds as though coming under jurisdiction means you're not allowed to do the project, and that's not what it means. It means you're gonna join them where there's 96% of applications that get the money.
I think they testified yesterday that was 100% last year.
Thank you.
Can you, I'm just a little confused, I'm not quite sure why that phrase with 25 or more units is in there. I mean, it's like it's pushing the size up as opposed to saying any size, so what's 25 doing in there? 25 or more units.
Well, so that's the trigger, right? So under Act 250 currently, the construction of 10 or more units requires Act 250 review.
Yep,
And so
got
here, it's 25 or more units. So those with 24 or fewer units will not trigger Act 250 jurisdiction under this section.
So a unit is something that has its self-contained water and sewer system.
Yes, the required elements for a dwelling.
So I get confused between what a development, what's the difference between a development and an improvement?
I don't think improvement is an Act 250 term. Just, I think that's a fairly broadly used land use term.
So when we're talking about development here, development is a defined term within Act 250 and improvement is as well. So you really should just be thinking about this of any steps taken to construct housing.
Like planning.
So planning, if no tangible steps have been taken, like thinking about a plan isn't an improvement. But any work done on the site, any removal of trees, any demolition of a site, any site preparation is an improvement. So I will read you the full Act 250 definition if you would like. Construction of improvements means any physical change to a project site. And then it includes some exceptions, except for an activity which is principally for preparation of plans that may be required and necessary for the application, such as test wells or pits, percolatory tests, line of sight clearing for survey markers. The district commission may approve more extensive exploratory work. The construction for home occupation, so something happening within the home. And then construction which the person seeking the exemption demonstrates is de minimis and will have no potential for significant adverse impact. So test sites, test wells, surveying, not construction of improvement. Things within the home for home occupation, not. And then also de minimis activities, which I think is also defined in here, are not construction. But generally speaking, it's any physical change to the project site. And that language exists throughout Act 250 for all the other jurisdictional triggers. This language on page 22 is nearly identical to the prior jurisdictional triggers. The change here being the removal of the 5-year 5-mile rule.
Purpose of that rule of 1983, 1984.
Historically, there were
Develop
developed,
expression for that. Cumulative.
yeah, there were developers who would divide a large project into smaller projects.
And then construct
Yeah, and avoid jurisdiction.
without review.
That's right.
So we're going back to, this would go back to the pre-1983 that allowed developers to enjoy less review.
Yes. Well, I don't think anyone's trying to put anything over on us. I think it's been very clearly stated that people think that Act 250 review impedes housing. Probably if you actually agree with that, maybe then there's no problem. But if you disagree with it,
Is the development a word that just, it's kind of an umbrella over both improvements and construction?
Yes, so the definition of development is defined, but yes, it is, possibly the word that's used on line 4 maybe should be project, but, actually, I'm sorry. Disregard everything I just said. Mixed use development is defined in Act 250. It has its own definition, which I can read you, but it is the construction of a mixed use building, which includes commercial and or industrial and residential, including affordable housing.
And affordable housing doesn't have to have
It's the
commercial and
20,
industrial, it's just,
right, and so I can read through all of that if you want the definitions.
like yesterday I thought someone testified that it wouldn't be considered development for the purpose of being reviewed by the development review board. Something like that. It's kind of stuff.
Development review board is often what the municipality will use for their land use permits. But here we are talking about Act 250.
Do they review improvements?
A municipal, yeah.
But, development review board.
They may, depending on how the municipality has defined what requires a land use permit for them.
Or how we've carved it out.
This is exclusive to Act 250 and not municipality review.
Improvement, development. Construction.
Why don't we just wrap this section and park for the day there, and knowing that we're gonna want to come back to this, but at least we'll just finish the last couple new provisions in that section.
So on page 22, subsection D, I've already mentioned this, but the word development does not include the construction of a priority housing project. So this is the full exemption for priority housing projects. Next, the definition of subdivision is being amended to include a provision similar to the one that we were just discussing. So a subdivision means a tract or tracts of land owned or controlled by a person that the person has partitioned or divided for the purpose of resale into 15 or more lots located within a designated neighborhood development area within any continuous period of 3 months. So in an NDA, in order to trigger Act 250, person will need to divide 15 or more lots for sale within a period of 3 months.
Are there current provisions in law that control that this is modifying, or this is, yeah? And
Well,
what's-
so currently under the statute, as I reviewed with you last week, the definition of subdivision means the partition or division of 6 or more lots in a town that does not have zoning, or 10 or more lots in a town that does have zoning, or 5 or more lots if it's a public action. So this is raising it to 15 in designated neighborhood development areas. I do believe all of the NDAs have zoning, so it would be raising it from the current 10 units, 10 lots to 15 lots. So increasing the number that is required to trigger Act 250 jurisdiction.
Okay. And is it 15 across the board, whether you do or do not have the land?
So as I was just saying, this is in neighborhood development areas.
Yeah.
And I believe all of the neighborhood development areas have,
To have houses.
Yeah.
For what you had to have for that designation, thank you.
yes.
So in that sense, we're going from 10 to 15,
And it's removing the 5-year 5 mile.
right? Thank you. All right, 3 months. And no distance. Thank you. One more before we pause. for a while.
And so the final change in this section is to the definition of priority housing project, which I've already mentioned. So the definition of priority housing project means a discrete project located on a single tract or multiple continuous tracts consisting exclusively of mixed income housing or mixed use or any combination thereof, and is located entirely within a downtown, new town center, village center that has permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, designated growth center or neighborhood development area. So currently under the statute, priority housing projects can be exempt from Act 250 if they're have less units than the jurisdictional trigger. This bill is removing the cap, and so any priority housing project that meets this definition is exempt from Act 250. And so the change that's happening here is that it's adding village centers that have permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, because currently you can't have a priority housing project in a village. And so this would allow villages that have permanent zoning to have unlimited number of priority housing projects be exempt,
If you don't have some,
not included. So they would still potentially need a permit. I'm sorry?
but not Act 250.
Yes,
Do you need Act 250 if they don't have zoning?
potentially, yes.
So that
As with Act 250, it depends on what type of project specifically you're talking about, but
So towns that feel or comfortable with what this law might do could start the process of eliminating their existing zoning and then be no longer required to.
so there's quite a few things in that sentence. So this is specific to priority housing projects, and it is also specific to a village center that has zoning and subdivision bylaws. So if a town had a village center and did not want there to be an exemption for priority housing projects, yes, I suppose they could go through the process of removing their zoning.
But if they don't have zoning now, then this doesn't apply to them.
Correct. In the case of village centers, which is the part being added.
I'm trying to process that.
Yeah,
Twist.
So if that brings us to, I'm gonna say like, so noted, there are questions about this section. That's an understatement. But that brings us to the end of 16. So let's pause here. We'll pick up at 17 tomorrow. And please keep your eyes open for a possible change. We're scheduled to start at 9, but I'm gonna back up to 8:30, our alternate starting time, in order to grab half-hour vacancies. We are legitimately complex and time-consuming, and an extra half hour that maybe some people want to take advantage of. So I'll let people know, email to you if we're gonna move back up, we need to check on other things. For instance, is council available at 8:30? You don't need to answer that, but, so, all right, well, thank you.
Comment.
Okay, so with that, thank you, everyone. We'll resume.